The first time my neighbor treated my driveway like it came free with his mortgage, I made the mistake of being nice about it. That was my first error. My second was thinking grown adults feel shame when you politely point out they're making your life harder. Back in 2019, I bought a little corner house just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, nothing you'd ever see in a magazine, just a solid little place in a quiet working-class neighborhood where everybody waves, everybody has an opinion, and nobody seems to know anybody's full name. The street was narrow, old trees hanging over both sides, and parking was a pain for pretty much everyone. Most houses had these tiny little driveways, one car if you were lucky, maybe one and a half if you didn't mind kissing the garage door with your bumper. The road itself was so tight that when two cars passed each other, they did that slow little dance, like both drivers were silently praying the mirrors stayed attached. But my place, by some small miracle, had a wide driveway. The previous owner had poured a double-wide slab years earlier, and it was big enough for 2 trucks, easy, maybe 3 if people were being civilized about it. At the time I bought the house, I barely thought about it. It was just a driveway. Useful, sure, but not exactly the kind of thing you get sentimental over. Then the family next door moved in. I'll call them the Crawfords. Dale Crawford was the dad, loud guy construction type, always talking like he was halfway through winning an argument nobody else knew had started. Melissa, his wife, seemed pleasant enough at first, and their teenage son Tyler had just gotten his license and carried himself like the state of North Carolina had personally knighted him with a set of car keys. 3 drivers, 3 vehicles, 1 tiny driveway next door, and sitting right beside them my nice big empty one. The first time I noticed one of their cars hanging over into my driveway, I honestly gave them every benefit of the doubt. Their SUV was just nudging across the line, not enough to totally block me, but enough to make backing out annoying. So I walked over, knocked on the door, and Melissa answered holding a dish towel. "Oh shoot, sorry," she said. "Tyler must have parked it there." They moved it right away. No attitude, no drama. I remember thinking, okay, fine. That's how neighbors work. Little mistake, quick fix, everybody moves on. Then it happened again. This time it was Dale's pickup, same little creep over the line, same awkward angle where I had to cut the wheel harder than I should have needed to. I knocked again. He apologized, moved it done. Still not a big deal. The third time nobody answered the door, so I left a note. Just a simple one. Friendly. Basically, "Hey, would you mind not blocking the driveway? It makes it tough to get out, thanks." The kind of note that should have come with a smiley face and a casserole. That worked for maybe 3 days. Then it started becoming a pattern, once a week, then twice. Then suddenly it felt like every other morning I was stepping outside with coffee in one hand and a fresh new reason to clench my jaw. Sometimes it was just a tire over the line. Sometimes the bumper hung across the entrance. Sometimes Tyler parked like he'd thrown the truck at the curb and accepted whatever happened after that as God's will. One morning I came outside for work and his truck was parked completely across the mouth of my driveway. Not partly. Not oops, sorry, didn't realize. Completely. Like somebody had built a steel fence overnight and forgot to mention it. I just stood there staring at it. You ever have one of those moments where your brain kind of stalls because what you're looking at is so stupid, it takes a second to process? That was me standing in dress clothes, holding coffee, trying to understand how a person parks like that and then goes inside to sleep peacefully. I knocked on their door. Nothing. I knocked harder. Still nothing. I called the number Melissa had given me when they moved in. Straight to voicemail. So I waited there like an idiot in my own driveway until Tyler finally came stumbling out in a hoodie, half asleep, scratching his head like I was the inconvenience. "Oh, my bad, dude," he said. "My bad, dude." Then he took his sweet time moving the truck and I ended up 20 minutes late to work. That was the point where something shifted in me. Because mistakes happen, sure. We all make them. But mistakes don't repeat themselves that many times unless somebody has decided they no longer care. And once I realized that the whole thing started to feel different. It wasn't clumsy anymore. It was lazy, entitled, and weirdly deliberate. Over the next couple months, I tried everything a normal person tries before they stop being normal. I texted, no reply. I knocked, no answer. I left another note, nothing. And the part that really got under my skin was that I knew they were home half the time. I could see lights on. I could hear the TV through the wall. They just didn't feel like dealing with me because somewhere along the line they'd decided my driveway was overflow parking and I was just the guy who complained about it. Then one morning I had a big meeting already running late and I stepped outside to find Tyler's truck parked sideways across the entire entrance again. No gap, no room, nothing. I walked over and pounded on the door hard enough my knuckles hurt. Silence. Called again. Voicemail. And standing there looking at that truck, I had this really clean, really unpleasant thought. I had spent 3 months asking for permission to use my own property. That was the morning I stopped asking. I went back inside, sat at my kitchen table, and started looking up city parking rules, towing regulations, anything about blocking private driveways. And what I found was simple enough. If somebody blocks access to your driveway even partly, that's a violation. I didn't need their blessing. I didn't need another fake apology. I needed one phone call. So the next time it happened, I didn't knock on their door. I called a tow company. About 20 minutes later, a tow truck rolled onto our street with that big diesel rumble and those flashing yellow lights, the sound of chains clanking in the back like something out of a very boring revenge movie. Curtains moved all up and down the block. The driver stepped out, looked at the truck blocking my driveway, then looked at me. "This the one?" he asked. "Yep," I said. He took a few pictures, slid the lift under the front wheels, and in maybe 3 minutes, Tyler's truck was up in the air. No speech, no debate, no emotional processing, just the quiet, mechanical sound of consequences finally doing their job. And by the time the Crawfords noticed, that truck was already halfway to the impound lot. Now, a normal family probably would have learned from that. The Crawfords did not. That night around 7, somebody started pounding on my front door like they were trying to serve a warrant. I opened it, and there stood Dale, face red, jaw tight, looking like a man who'd just paid money he deeply believed the universe owed him back. "You had my kid's truck towed." Not a question, an accusation. I leaned on the door frame and said, "Yeah, it was blocking my driveway. You could have asked us to move it." And I swear that one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly absurd. I had asked. I'd asked in person, by note, by text, by phone, by standing outside in work clothes while his son yawned at me. So I told him exactly that. I said I'd been asking for months and nobody cared. He shook his head and called me petty. Petty? There's something weirdly useful about the moment somebody mislabels basic self-respect as pettiness. It tells you everything. To him, the fact that his family wanted something convenient mattered more than the fact that it belonged to me. So I looked right at him and said, "I'm not negotiating access to my own driveway anymore." Then I shut the door. For 2 days' peace, I almost thought maybe the message had landed. Then on the third morning, Dale's pickup was halfway across my driveway. Not fully blocking it this time, just enough to say, "What are you going to do about it?" So I did exactly what I'd done before. I called the same tow company. The dispatcher answered, I gave him my address, and there was this tiny pause before he chuckled and said, "Ah, yeah, we remember you." 20 minutes later, tow number 2. This time, Melissa came running out into the street while the truck was already being lifted, waving her arms, yelling for them to stop. The driver just pointed at me, standing in my driveway. Property owner call. Nothing he could do. Off it went. And here's where it stopped being annoying and started getting expensive. Towing wasn't just the hook fee. It was storage, after-hours pickup paperwork, all that stuff. Every trip to impound cost them a few $100. You'd think that kind of money would sharpen the mind. Instead, they got stubborn. By the end of that month, I'd called 6 tows. Then they started playing games. Dale would leave just an inch hanging over the line like he was trying to turn municipal code into a riddle. Tyler would park crooked and act like geometry was subjective. So I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, doorbell footage, little notes in my phone with dates and plate numbers. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was organized. Tau 789, all the way up through 12. Then came the one that changed the tone of the whole street. Tyler had borrowed the truck on a Friday night and parked across my driveway before heading inside to get ready for some party. Around 9:30 it got towed. He didn't realize it until after 1 in the morning. And instead of assuming maybe, just maybe, this was the same thing that had already happened a dozen times, he decided the truck had been stolen and called the police. The officer showed up, took the report, ran the plates, and within minutes told him exactly where his truck was. Downtown, sitting in impound. I didn't hear that conversation myself, but I heard about it the next morning when Dale showed up again, except this time he didn't look furious. He looked tired, deflated, like a man who'd spent half the night arguing through bulletproof glass with an employee who had absolutely no interest in his feelings. "This is getting out of hand," he told me. And I remember nodding because for once he was right. But I also remember saying real calm, "I'm not the one parking there." That shut him up for a second. After that, things stayed quiet for about 2 weeks. Then football season hit. And if you've ever lived on a street where people host game days, you already know where this goes. Friends over cars everywhere, common sense dead on arrival. One Saturday, somebody parked across my driveway again, except this time it wasn't even one of the Crawfords. It was one of their guests. Still got towed. And guess who got blamed for it? Tow 14, 15, 16, 17. By the time we hit the 20s, the whole block knew the routine. Kids on bikes would slow down when the tow truck came by. One guy down the street started calling it the Crawford parking tax. I even put reflective markers at the edge of my driveway and a sign that said, "Do not block driveway towing enforced." Bright obvious, impossible to misunderstand unless you were committed to misunderstanding it. Which they were. Tow 24, 25, 26. And then number 27 finally ended the whole circus. Not because they had some deep moral awakening. Not because they suddenly respected me. Nothing that noble. What finally did it was money in a different direction. Apparently, repeated impounds started causing problems with their insurance, raised flags, bumped premiums, the kind of bureaucratic pain that lands way harder than a neighbor saying, "Please stop." About 2 weeks later, I heard jackhammers and saw a concrete crew next door. They were widening their driveway. That's the part that still makes me laugh even now. They had been able to solve the whole problem the entire time. They just didn't feel any urgency until ignoring it got expensive enough. They poured a whole new slab, spent thousands, and ever since that concrete cured my driveway has stayed clear. Not mostly clear. Not better. Clear. 8 straight months. Not one tire over the line. Not one late night knock. Not one sleepy "my bad, dude." And standing there, the first quiet morning after all that coffee in my hand, looking at my wide open driveway with no truck, no SUV, no nonsense, I finally understood something that took me way too long to learn. Most boundary problems don't start with some huge act of disrespect. They start small. A few inches, a little convenience, a temporary favor that quietly turns into a habit. And if you keep swallowing it because you want peace, people don't usually read that as kindness. They read it as permission. That's the bitter little lesson in all this, I guess. Politeness only works when the other person has some interest in being decent. When they don't, politeness just becomes the cheap version of surrender. I waited too long because I wanted to be a good neighbor, and all that really did was teach them I'd tolerate more than I should. So, no, I don't feel guilty about the tow trucks. 27 sounds savage when you say it fast, I know. But I also know what it feels like to stand in your own driveway at 7 in the morning, late for work, staring at somebody else's truck like somehow your property became optional because they found it useful. The truth is, I didn't start a war. I just stopped volunteering to lose one. And the last image I still carry from that whole mess is beautiful in the pettiest possible way. Fresh concrete next door, white parking lines, chalked out 3 cars tucked neatly into their brand new expanded driveway, and mine sitting wide open in the morning sun like it had finally been returned to me. No yelling, no drama, no big movie speech, just silent space and the look on Dale's face the first week he realized the free parking was over forever. That felt an awful lot like justice. So tell me this. When somebody keeps crossing a line you've already asked them not to cross, at what point does patience stop being kindness and start being permission? Were the tow trucks fair, or did I go too far? Drop your take, and if you've ever had a neighbor test your boundaries like this, I want to hear that story too.